Okay, I'm going to talk to you about developing an idea further, having already explored it. So when you have an idea and you have already completed a set, sustained amount of work for it, and potentially already brought it to conclusion, and now you are needing to develop it further. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put in the centre the general theme of what you're looking at, or basically what you've taken photos of. So I have taken photos and drawn from pictures of hands, so that's the first thing that I'm going to have in the centre. And if you remember, when we're exploring things with bubble maps, it's good to start with those basic prompt words of who, what, where, when, and how. So these are great question prompt words. We'll put some question marks after just to remind you that that is what they are, question prompts. Actually, maybe I'll make this look a bit better as well. Maybe it doesn't look better, it looks clearer. I'm going to give you some ideas of how to present this as well, because I think presentation is quite important. So obviously who, it can be, so you could be thinking about new artists here. Following on from that, maybe do a little bit of research, try and find out about some new artists. I might look at an artist called Rodin, who looked at hands. I might continue to look at Da Vinci's hands and his focus on anatomy. And then obviously you need to be thinking about who you're going to photograph. So my family, myself. At the moment, that is probably realistically what I can do. It might be that you can also look at friends, photograph friends. And now sort of thinking about more general concepts. So in the slide, I've included some themes that you could be thinking about. They're very general themes. So if you remember, one of the themes was armour. With armour, you can then think about the opposite of armour, which is that you're vulnerable because you're not protected. And then maybe you could think about, you know, taking that one step further and investigating under the skin and anatomy. Okay, so these things could follow on from the who. With all, basically, they could all be relevant to each other. So a lot of crossing over there of themes. When I think about the what, so what are you going to photograph? So remember that, what are you going to think about? So remember the three main concepts here, which are the sort of things, people, and places. And then looking at those wider themes, I thought, well, I could then think about maybe thinking about all of these things and thinking about maybe contrast, and the opposite of contrast, which is similarity, and then obviously following that even further, sort of the idea of merging in and camouflage. So contrast could be, what could that be? Old and young. Wet, dry. Colour, black and white. Okay. So similarity could be things that connect us. So you could think about linked hands. You could think, this is just for my hands theme, obviously. Connected is also about communication. So how do we communicate with hands? So gestures, things like that. Camouflage, so this could lead into hand painting, or maybe projection. Okay, and so on. So I've got a whole bunch of ideas there relating to those basic words. Well, the first word was basically contrast, and then I looked at the opposite of contrast, which is similarity. So tons of ideas for that. Just related to what, you could also take the contrast into who, and that could be different hands, different people's hands, old, young hands, and so on. Where? Okay, so obviously this is about location. And one of the themes on the personal investigation was domestic. So you could think about domestic location, and you could think about the opposite of that, which would be wild location. Domestic could link to things like chores, routines, self-care, so washing, brushing your teeth, jobs that you're doing at home. Wild you could think about how we deal with our hands when we're out in the elements. So it could be gloves. You could think about gloves. You could think about what your hands are likely to experience when you're in the wild. So it could be picking things, the earth, that sensation of like grass or earth or sand running through your hands. But I quite like the idea of picking things, which could be fruit, flowers, collecting. You could take it in you could overlap these two. Collecting could link it into domestic as well, so you could think about sort of that idea of, sorry, very badly done, but things like picking up rubbish or tidying, the kind of things that we experience with our hands. Okay, so moving on to when. So when could be past, it could be future, and it obviously is now. So you're not going to be able to take photographs in the future, but you can think about how what you're doing now may affect your future. So the idea of the future is in your hands, and striving and being ambitious, and creating to improve your future, your own future. You could think about future events. So milestones quite often involve things that might incorporate, for me, it might incorporate my hands. So it could be things like, decorating your hands. It could be jewellery. It could be nails, etc. And it could be that you think about your family, and how family members say something about the past, but they also say something about the future. So, younger, older family members. It could be when you're talking about now that you're talking about journeys. Thinking about the past, well, photos record experience. So photos are the past. So the idea of maybe a diary, or again recording key events. So at the moment this is an unprecedented situation nationally, which we've never experienced before. So that's quite a big event that you could record. Okay, the how. So obviously you can think about things like lighting. So you're thinking about logistics. You can think about the spaces that you're going to work in, and that could bring in one of the other person investigation themes, which is confined. You could think about contained and wrapped, which is another person investigation theme. So that could involve props. It could involve foil, cling film, gloves, obviously, gloves or fabric. It could involve string, elastic. I mean, there are artists who've looked at these sorts of things. You can also think about the how with your camera, so viewpoints, worm's eye, bird's eye, close up, etc. angles. Okay, so hopefully all of this is going to help you to generate new ideas for the direction that your project is going to go in. You're sticking with the same theme, but hopefully you can see from this that this extension of the project is going to give you the opportunity to develop and create much more interesting and original angles for approaching your ideas. So please don't think, right, I don't know, taken photographs of some tools and therefore that has to be the whole of my project. We're now taking the same thing, which was working your tools, and then seeing what else you can do with it, seeing where else you can go with it, and getting inspired. Really, this whole process is very important. Doing bubble maps, creating bubble maps, is your evidence that you can think divergently, that you can generate ideas, and that you're able to develop ideas and refine ideas. And by the way, I'm pretty much quoting words that come up on the GCSE mark scheme. So you can cover an awful lot of the GCSE mark scheme by doing this properly, not just saying, oh, Mrs. told me to do a bubble map, I'll copy Mrs. bubble map and do exactly what she's done, but genuinely really reflecting on the project. Okay, good luck with that. Thanks.